Pa 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 pum 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 pum. Welcome back, fellow listener, welcome back to my Twitch channel. And now it's time for another audiobook. Then, last time we began the first novel of the Grey Oak Adventure series, and the first novel of the Gord the Rogue adventure. And the first, and the first novel of written by Gary Gygax for the World of Grey Oak setting, the first setting ever created for the Dungeons and Dragons, the most notorious role-playing system. Well, last time we know our protagonist, Gord, the Gutless, a low scum, a delinquent, who want to survive in the low quarter of the city of Grey Oak. Risk his life, he steals something, and then he go to the jail. Then a mysterious guard free him and accompanied him to a mysterious building. There ends chapter 2, and today we begin with chapter 3. So, let's start. Chapter 3. A sip of water, as always. Damn. I have a little water today. So, the inside of the old building was a marvel of decayed Rococo splendor. Aside from a dilapidated, filthy anteroom, the whole place was furnished in grand but shabby style. It was the mansion of Theobald, king of rag pickers, sovereign of scavengers, lord of junk. No other term could describe the welter of ragged, tattered, damaged, and defaced articles that filled the place to overflowing. Amid this incredible college sat a huge fat man on what was possibly once the divan of some Backloonish potentate. The tattered fabric of the sofa seemed to complement the stained and worn-out finery of the gross man who rested upon its broken frame. For a moment he listened while Clyde paid him proper homage and began to state the reason why he and Gord had invaded the man's domain. Clyde was the guard, obviously. Then Theobald waved a great pudgy-fingered hand, its cheap earrings and gaudy bracelets flashing and jangling as he did so, and Clyde immediately fell silent. "What qualifies this little gallows for my consideration, Clyde the Sharper? How dare you bring such before me and demand payment in good silver?" The fat fellow virtually shouted the last few words, and the waters of his neck were reddened by such exertion. "Take him back to your miserable workhouse, or have him tossed into the lime pits. It's all the same to me. I won't buy him." Clyde didn't seem too disturbed by the outburst. "Great master," he said soothingly, "I don't dispute your needs, but I crave your pardon with respect to the analysis of this fine young chap's worth." The fat man snorted at that, But Clyde continued as if he hadn't heard. "He's an urchin from the worst part of the slum quarter. One clever enough to steal clothing and make it all the way into the heart of the Petit Bazaar. There, he actually managed to make off with a finely wrought silver bracelet, pretending all the while to be part of an entourage of tall fellows. And had the merchant's cant not alerted the watch, he'd likely have escaped too." Merchant's cant? Gord had never heard of that before. He knew that the thieves had the secret language, as did certain others, but the merchants? This was stunning news indeed. Meanwhile, the amazing conversation continued. "So you think that qualifies him to be an apprentice to the beggar master? Bah! Perhaps you can peddle him to some lesser person, robbing the customer of his money in the process, but not to one so wise as I. Again I say, take the vermin away. Bronze will be too dear for the likes of him." Gord suddenly realized that Clyde and the obese monster seated on the couch were bargaining over his price. He was about to be sold into virtual slavery. He started to open his mouth to shout that he was a free citizen of Greyhawk, but the memory of the workhouse sprang unbidden to his mind. Gord shut his mouth again and remained quiet. Perhaps apprenticeship to this notorious creature was better than servitude or death in the prison workhouse, perhaps. "Done then," said Clyde, reaching out and slapping the palm of the beggar master with his own open hand. "It's yours for only 10 commons." Muttering darkly, the beggar master dug a bulging purse from the worn girdle of faded purple leather that somehow encompassed his vast girth. One at a time, caressing each, he counted out 10 copper coins for the outstretched hand of the man before him. Clyde, more sure of himself now that he had coins in hand, grinned ruefully, shook his head and said, "You have me again, you miserable, fat bastard of a skinflint. This dirty wife will turn out to be your most profitable purchase yet, or I am a half-orc." The beggar master eyed him coldly. "If you weren't of small use to me, Clyde, I'd have you killed for the sport of it. Get yourself and your money out of here, and don't come back for a long time, or I will overlook your usefulness." This was spoken slowly and softly, but the guard reacted with haste. His arrogance gone as quickly as it had come, Clyde left hurriedly, without formality or even a goodbye. It made Gord shiver to see the burly guard humbled so abruptly. "Come here, boy!" The voice sounded fat and soft like the man speaking, but the tone was similar to that which had sent Clyde flying off. Gord hastened to obey, and then smack! The huge fat hand of the beggar master was not as soft as it looked. Gord was knocked off his feet by the open-handed swat to the side of his head. He saw bright flashes of light before his eyes, and his ears rang. When his head cleared, he looked up and saw the man who was now his master staring at him without expression. "Now you know exactly where you stand, boy. I paid hard copper for you, and you are now my property, as certain as you belonged to the workhouse. Only the guards there are kinder than you will find me to be." Gord couldn't help trembling, even as he was trying, out of pride, to keep from showing his fear. He instinctively drew himself into a huddled heap on the floor, watching and waiting for a kick in the ribs or another slap across the head. The fat man saw Gord's terror, and a faint smile lifted the corners of his mouth. Gord could not tear his eyes away from the blubbery lips, and he watched as the smile was transformed into a cruel leer. "You understand, don't you, boy? You have escaped the cooking pot, but now lie amidst the coals. But you might have a little promise at that. On your feet, boy, and tell me your name, and all you know." Gord's session with his new master had been long and grueling. At the slightest faltering or hesitancy on his part, the gross monster had calmly struck him again. Gord soon realized that the beggar master actually enjoyed hitting him and seeing him suffer as a result. When he understood this fully, Gord made no further effort to hide his fear or his pain, so as to keep the fat man in as good humor as possible. But at the same time, he was careful not to overdo the display, nor to allow sniveling and weeping to interfere with prompt and complete replies. After an hour or so, the beggar master seemed to grow bored with the sport. By then, Gord had told him details of his whole existence. Surprisingly, the fat man had seemed to relish parts of it, especially the story of how he'd gotten rid of his foster mother's body and the episode when Gord had wet his pants in fear of Snuggle. The session was ended with a handclap that brought a one-eyed man scurrying into the main chamber of the Weir Palace. "This little rat is now your pupil, Furgo," said the fat man. "Send him to me if he needs correction. Otherwise, I wish never to see him again, unless he becomes one of my money-earning operatives." With the one bright eye that bulged out of his lean and leathery face, Furgo peered intently at Gord for a moment. Then he took him firmly by the shoulder and led him behind an array where a short passage led from the grand saloon to a dozen rickety rooms that constituted the remainder of the first story of the building. In one of these rooms, his new instructor seated the boy on a stool while he looked him over closely. Not bad, not bad." Furgo chuckled as he examined Gord's bleary eyes, his runny nose, and the pox sores Gord had created for his escape from the workhouse labor. "Pretty sharp for an untrained boy, and such a stupid-looking one at that," he said as he steered Gord out of the seat and over to a flight of creaking steps that wound upward. "Where are you taking me?" Gord asked the thin beggar timorously. Furgo prodded the frightened boy with a finger, urging him up the steps. "Never mind, laddie boy, never mind. You are Furgo's charge now. You just do as you are told, and you have nothing to fear save my anger or Master Theobald's." They proceeded to mount the stairs until they came to the top floor, several levels above the ground. The place consisted of one large open area and a warren composed of many cubicles. Furgo led Gord to a cubicle in the middle of the maze and told him to remember its location. This was to be his home until he was told differently. Whenever he wasn't receiving instruction, he was to be in his cubicle. Failure meant punishment or death, depending on the beggar master whim. The one-eyed man didn't have to explain to Gord that the outcome would most likely be nasty either way, given the propensities of the lord of this place. Gord merely nodded to convey his complete understanding. Furgo then led him to the kitchen in the cellar. There the greasy cook, whom Furgo referred to as Batcrop, gave him some boiled vegetables and broth. Not very tasty, but more nourishment than Gord had taken at one sitting in a long time. His gulping and slobbering over the mess made both Furgo and Batcrop low loudly. Both agreed that Gord was likely to do okay here if he was as quick to learn and obey as he was to wolf down the show. That made Gord grin in agreement, whereupon Batcrop smacked him on the ear and chided him in a gruff but pleasant tone for insolence to his betters. Emboldened by the good feeling in his belly and the comradely buffet, Gord asked, "Where's everybody? This huge mansion has plenty of room for lots more than us." "Us? So it's us now, is it, my lad?" Furgo said with a mixture of humor and threat in his voice. Then he turned and spoke to his chum. "See that, Batcrop? That delicious whale you feed this worthless apprentice is too good for Ren. Gives them delusions." Gord didn't know what to do or say at that point, so he shrunk into himself and tried to be invisible. Furgo noticed the effort and apparently appreciated it. "That's the ticket," said the one-eyed beggar as he clipped the boy across the back of his head. "You keep practicing at that, and you'll be a good addition to our group." Then, recalling what Gord's original question was, Furgo grinned and told him, There are dozens of others who stay in this mansion. At that word, he and Batcrop both guffawed at Gord's use of such a lofty word to describe the decaying place. They'll be coming in between dusk and dark, turning over their earnings, then getting fed and doing their training before sleep time. You'll meet them all soon enough. Don't fret about that. Come on now, laddie boy. This day is all over for you. After being escorted back to his room and kicked in the rear by the departing Furgo, Gord lay down with a cig upon the heap of dirty straw and all the rags that was his pallet. Not bad at all, he thought. After all, he wasn't dead. There was no muscle-wrenching toil to be done now. His belly was full. The rags and straw were as good a bed as he'd ever know. He shut his eyes and although it could not have been more than mid-afternoon at the latest, fell asleep instantly. He dreamed of fat-belled ogres and trolls dressed as guards, but they didn't trouble his slumber at all. In his dreams, God was always able to break out of their grasp, steal what they had, and slip away. End of chapter 3. Damn. The bottle is empty. Damn. So, let's continue. Chapter 4. Pain was the only sensation that could penetrate his brain. It was at least a sign that he was alive, and Gord accepted it as such. How long he could hold his position he not know, but he was determined not to admit defeat and to persevere until Furgo said he could stop. That there were several others undergoing the same torture was indeed consolation to Gord. Perhaps if one of them broke first, he would follow, but until then he was determined to endure. What the youth was suffering was simply training to be a contortionist, to be able to assume the guise of a maimed and hopeless cripple, part of the education necessary to fill the corps of beggars, each so pitiful and pathetic that the hardest-hearted passerby will ever rot and drop a drab or two into one's bowl. Each morning Gord began the day with exercises, calisthenics, that kept his young body lean and supple. If he did well, he was then allowed to break his fast with the dozens of other apprentice and journeyman beggars quartered in the beggar master's building. Failure to please meant no food at best, but Gord preferred not to think about that. Following the meal came lessons in the secret sign of the beggars, a means of communication that was supposedly unknown to the uninitiated, an amalgam of the Thieves Guild and the secret speech of the Merchants Guild that had been perverted to the ends of the lowly Beggars Union. Thereafter came more physical training, and then mental disciplines, once again, usually memory training, and then lessons in assessing people. Gord was quick to learn, and the lessons gladdened his heart. The skills and knowledge he was gaining were tools that would enable him to break out of the prison of the slum, the old city, and become something far greater than a successful beggar, let alone a beggar's apprentice. The actual goal was a secret, one kept closely among the chosen of the beggar master, and Gord had earned his way into that selected group. As he fought with body and mind to keep the pain from getting the best of him, Gord began to slightly recall what he had learned and experienced in days recently gone by. Those who dwelt with the beggar master were unlike other members of the Beggars Union. The latter simply paid a tithe to the master in return for a select location and the promise of aid when in trouble. But those indentured to the beggar master had to turn over every iron drab, bronzy, or food scrap they garnered. After 2 months of service and general instruction inside Theobald's mansion, Gord had been sent out with a group of other apprentices and journeymen under the watchful eyes of a pair of master beggars. Since he did well in his efforts to swell the beggar master's coffers, he was allowed to go on more of these field trips, and he soon developed a well-deserved reputation as a good scavenger. Whether he went out in morning or evening to new city or old, Gord had managed to come back with more coins and food than any of the others. Of course, sometimes he had to resort to theft when soulful pleading for alms had failed to net what he felt would be an acceptable take. Early in his career, Gord had been beaten once for failure, and he vowed to himself that such would never happen again. Continued success brought the reward of being initiated into the beggar master's inner circle. Each initiate swore an oath never to reveal, on penalty of death, the secret of the circle. When Gord was accepted as a member, he learned that the master was dissatisfied with his alliance with the Thieves Guild. The arrangement between the groups was simple. Each beggar kept his or her eyes open for any likely prospects, signaling a mark to a nearby thief or bringing back word about potential targets for burglary or robbery. In return, a thief always gave to a beggar he encountered on the street, and the successful escapade by a thief meant a tithe from the Thieves Guild to the Beggars Union. However, this tithe was only 1 cent of that portion of the take paid by the thieves to their guild. Thus, if 100 silver nobles were lifted from someone's strongbox, the thief would pay the customary 1 cent share to the guild, and of these 10 coins the beggar master got 1. This was insufficient. Master of Beggars Theobald would have it all. His scheme was simple. The beggar master had enlisted renegade thieves, promising to pay them handsomely for their services. These professionals then trained the most promising beggars in the arts and crafts of thievery. Now there existed a cadre of beggars who were as skilled at cutting purses, picking pockets, and filching valuables as any of the rogues roaming the city under the auspices of the Thieves Guild. The original instructors had disappeared in the meantime, so now only those whom the beggar master had in his palm knew the secret. It was whispered among the talented apprentices that someday they would be the leaders of a host of beggar thieves who would vanquish the guild and make any surviving thieves swear fealty to the Beggars Union. For the time being, they must all bring in coins by the sackful so that assassins and mercenaries could be enlisted when the master decided the time had come. "Rest!" Fergus shouted, and all of the apprentices but Gord collapsed on the floor, grimacing and gasping. With his delivery broken but his resolve intact, the youth slowly lowered his left leg from its position behind his back and brought his right arm as slowly down to his side, flexing both to restore full circulation, but without apparent effort or pain. "You there, on the floor," said Fergus. "Observe Gord. He isn't whining or wheezing. That's how you should all be. On your feet for more exercise now. For a break, we'll practice on the blade dummy later." As they groaned quietly and darted hateful looks at Gord, the other boys and girls of the group arose and returned to training. Although all wore beggars' rags, each was clean beneath the garments. Gord hadn't liked the bathing at first, but it was not optional. At times they would be required to assume a role other than that of a crippled, maimed, or diseased beggar. Looking dirty was easy, but pretending to be an honest citizen of standing was not. The light stretching and bending exercises were easy, compared to what they had been through before them, and they would help a lot when dealing with the test of the blade dummy. The apprentice took to the calisthenics with vigor, for all feared what was coming and wanted to be as prepared as they could be. The blade dummy was one of many kits used for training. The simplest was just a dummy for beginners practice. A different one was mounted on a pedestal and slowly turned to make it difficult to approach. Yet another was covered with belts, so that the slightest miscue by a would-be pickpocket caused a jingling. The blade dummy was the worst. Its robe, girdle, and tunic pockets were lined with razor-like blades, positioned differently each time the thing was set up. As an instructor counted, each trainee had to take a turn at testing sleeve, breast, pocket, and worst of all, the pierce took it into the girdle, while a slip in some other area would inflict a painful cut. The pierce was a double challenge. To get it free without encountering the blade surrounding it was difficult, and if it was removed too hastily, with too much force, or clumsily, then a spring blade from the girdle would shoot upward. A hand slowly pulled away would be gashed, or even severed if its owner was too hesitant. All of the apprentices were too weak to be seriously hurt, so long as they were careful, but it was hard to be confident about the blade dummy, and the strain was terrible. Eventually, that exercise ended, and this time there was no blood shed at all. The students were indeed getting better. The subsequent practicing of stealthy movement, concealment, and lock-picking was just easy routine. Lessons in assessing the valuables of an individual, what was carried and where, how to observe a place for future burglary, and so forth filled the remainder of the long afternoon. Furgo was a hard taskmaster, and other experts who occasionally took their turns, and instruction were just as demanding. After supper was time for letters, learning to write, spell, read, change hands to write with the other, and draw, and the seemingly endless copying of plans, maps, documents, and books. Even more than he enjoyed all of this in-house learning, Gord liked the 2 market days, for then the apprentices were sent forth to put into action the skills they had learned. Tomorrow was a field day, and anticipation of the jaunt was uppermost in the minds of all the apprentices, as they bade each other good night at the end of the evening's lessons. "What's the big deal about tomorrow?" asked Hoodie, a teeny fellow of only 7 or 8 years of age, as he dogged Gord's heels while they ascended the stairway. The youngster was a newcomer and had not yet been on an excursion outside the master's wall. Gord looked wise and winked at the little waif. "Don't you worry none about it, laddie boy. It's soon enough you'll be learning." Hoddy didn't know whether to grin or not at such words, as close as they were to those he heard continually from Master Furgo. He started to ask more, but Gord waved him off, and Hoodie shuffled discontentedly to his own place above. Gord liked the little fellow, and that was saying a lot, for Gord had but 2 other such comrades in the whole place. Hoddy thought him big, strong, and smart. As far as Gord knew, that made Hoddy different from all the others in the beggar master's decorated palace. Of course, Gord was often congratulated for his cunning, stealth, and even good thinking, but somehow he didn't take such great pride in being praised for clever begging or thievery. All this adulation was for Gord as a person, not for anything in particular he did. Soon the massive old structure was quiet. The practice rooms in the loft were empty. The 2 floors beneath were filled with sleeping beggars. The first floor, the office of the Union, and the sprawling quarters of Master Theobald were silent too. The obese beggar master was anxious that everyone be rested and alert, so that all would go well on the morrow. Before dawn, the next morning, Gord and a score of other special apprentices were assembled. Each received instruction as to what he or she was to be that day. For this mission, Gord was teamed with Violet, a beautiful young girl of about 16. She was a whore. Gord liked her, for she had been nice to him from the first. Violet was a top earner and the favorite of Theobald, and Gord didn't like to think about that. He supposed she had been put in the special group originally because the beggar master liked her. Gord was still naive at times. In reality, Violet was an accomplished actress and seasoned strumpet by the age of 13. Theobald simply knew talent, and that was why she was in the select group. She could pose as a pitiful young mother with a starving child, a vaguely pretty but crippled girl, an armless crone, or a stricken doxy. Today she was the latter, posing as a courtesan from out of town, slumming as it were amid the merchants and artisans of the Garden Quarter's sporting district. She shot Gord a smile, and his heart raced. Gord was beginning to feel new stirrings within himself of late, especially when he was around Violet. Dressed in ragged cloaks, the team slipped out of the building separately. Each group went its own way quietly, disappearing quickly so as not to elicit unwanted attention. Gord and Violet made their way quickly to an empty building nearby, slipping in through a side door. A beggar there accepted their hand signs and took them into the next room, where he moved the table and lifted a concealed trapdoor. Gord helped the girl descend the ladder-like stairway. At the bottom, some 20 or more feet beneath the streets above, was a secret passage that led under the wall dividing old town from new. There were gates to pass through, of course, but the cost was more than an iron rub for each pair of legs. Spies and watchers were at this place too, and the beggar master wanted no reports of beggars moving to places where thievery would be reported later. Thievery for which the guild took no responsibility or paid no share to city officials. Already the guild was getting pressure to account for such activity, and suspicion of the thieves was rife. Neither could the new corpse go in non-beggar's disguise, for obviously the whole scheme will come to light then. Thus hidden ways and quick changes in secret stations were used to throw any observers off the track. After 100 or so paces, the pair came to a ladder. Violet ascended first, and Gord watched her from below, holding his candle so that he could view her sharply young legs. He began thinking of ways to be alone with her when they got back to their headquarters. They changed in the room to which the ladder brought them. It was a small place hidden in the basement of the establishment of a pawnbroker. He was one of the beggar master's trusted henchmen and made a fat profit from the goods he fenced for the burgeoning group of non-guild thieves. Violet's change was easy. She simply removed her cloak, revealing a fancy dress underneath, then took off her head wrap and shook out her hair. The soft, wavy, golden-brown tresses shone in the candlelight. Then she pulled several small items from the pockets of her cloak. An old cracked mirror enabled her to apply pigments to darken her eyes and rouge her cheeks. Next came jewelry. Fake stuff, naturally, but only an expert looking closely could tell that it was worth only coppers, not silver nobles. In the meantime, Gord had shed his dirty garments and donned hose, pantaloons, doublet, and short cape. He was the serving boy of the courtesan Penora, lately of Divers, but now considering making her home in the more cosmopolitan city of Grey Oak. In his role, Gord would be not decide, for Violet Penora will certainly command all eyes. His mission was to pick as many pockets and sneak as many purses and other valuables as he could. This will be fun, thought Gord. Then he remembered that Violet would also be plying her original profession, and the day seemed less appealing than it had. But no matter, one had to work to survive, and this was work he enjoyed. Exiting the basement from a back door and melting into the throng on the street was a simple matter for them. Both knew how to avoid attention when they wanted to. Once past Odd Alley, they walked west to the processional and then turned north. Gord was excited at actually mingling as an equal with the folk who strolled along here. This was the major north-south artery of the city. Southward it led to the Grand Square and the Citadel. They were going the opposite direction, toward the Garden Quarter. In a short time they left the broad thoroughfare in favor of the narrower streets where the rich and famous commoners of the city dwelled. Blue Boar Street was renowned for its shops. Its drinking and eating establishment and the quality of the gentlefolk and rakes who frequented its curving length. Pausing here and browsing there, they proceeded along as would a well-heeled woman of high station accompanied by a servant. Before they entered the Wizard's Hat Inn, Gord had managed to pinch a spider silk kerchief and an ivory comb, lift a small purse from an incautious gentleman fretting while his lady looked at the material in a dressmaker's, and filch 2 silver pieces from the tunic of a prosperous lesser cleric. He had missed an opportunity or two, surely, but he did so by choice. If the prospector looked too alert or too knowledgeable, the lad simply passed up, having a go. The Wizard's Hat was a place of considerable reputation, and it was filled with people. The tavern area was crowded with all sorts of men, while most of the tables in the main room were clustered with ladies and gentlemen eating and drinking, for it was but a bit past noon. A haughty Violet accosted the sweating proprietor and demanded the table near the front of the room. One look at her, and from her and he hastened to comply. Who knew what mistress she was or what influence she had? Anyway, a looker like that near the front of his place would encourage custom. Unseated, Violet ordered a goblet of cooled green wine from Celine, a place Gord had never heard of. She waved him to a position off to one side, and the ostler brought him a small beer. While she dined on the finest provender of the establishment, Gord was served a sort of slumgullion that the serving maid identified as raw goo. Violet struggled to suppress a smile when he asked her what it was. "It's a ragout," she said quickly with a stern expression on her face. "That's one word. A foreign way of saying it's a thin stew with more vegetables and the like than a real meat. Slumgullion's better, but don't say that here. Gord, now hush, or they'll cop wise as to where you are from." Gord wrinkled up his nose and was about to whisper a reply when a shadow moved across the table. Violet fell immediately back into character. "Get rid of that sullen face, boy," she snapped, "or I shall have you take your fare in the kitchen with the lackeys there. Have you no appreciation for my generosity?" As she spoke, Violet seemed quite annoyed and very much engaged in a mistress-servant relationship. Gord beat back his words and obeyed her, for as displeased as he was about their relative meals and their imperious manner, he understood that she was now up to something. "Pardon, good lady, but I noted you courage in allowing a serving boy to sup with you. May I be so bold as to suggest that you do so for lack of a proper gentleman escort, and to offer my company?" With that, he made a courtly bow and flourish, adding, "The Honorable Master Ralph, elder of 7 Mile Mill, at your service." Somehow Violet managed to blush, lower her eyes, smile pretty, and stammer all at once. "Well, sir, or honorable master, I should say I am at a disadvantage." "Pardon, my lady, I shall take my leave then," said Ralph. Gord was quite pleased with that turn of events, but before the fellow could turn away, Violet spoke quickly. "Oh, nay, good master, I am most grateful for your kindness and courtesy. I crave your pardon if you felt otherwise. It is just that a proper lady shouldn't converse with strangers. Yet this knave is indeed unfitting company for one of breeding such as yourself." "Then perhaps our host will introduce us formally. I shall serve your ladyship, and the boy can be sent to keep company with the scullions. He'd be more comfortable there, certainly. Why, look at him now, the picture of one ill at ease with superiors." Gord was indeed feeling out of place, and angry too, but there was neither word nor deed for him. He sat quietly as the gentleman gestured toward the ostler, who scurried over and performed his role in the ritual. Good sir, may I introduce Lady Penora? After being informed by Violet of divers again filled in by the fair lady, and sorry, and to you, my lady, may I have the pleasure of introducing. Gord found all of this to be quite sickening. All the more so because Violet seemed to be really enjoying herself, but when the amenities were over, that was the end of it for Gord. With no further ado, the proprietor put him in the charge of a bustling wench, who in turn took him to the kitchen. There he finished his beer and ragout, and slumped gloomily, wondering what to do now. The answer soon presented itself, for several of the scullions and stable boys were gathered near the rear door, rolling knucklebones. Well paid they must be, for each had a scattering of iron drops, brass bits, and bronzes before him. The bronze coins surprised Gord. These were stakes worth his while. Forgetting about the handsome gallant and Violet for the moment, he moved toward the game. Shuffling his feet and looking as stupid as he could, Gord asked what the boys were doing. Grinning, the leader asked if the inquirer had any money. If so, perhaps they'd be kind enough to teach him a wonderful new game, and give him a chance to win a fortune. Gord beat at it perfectly, and soon he was being called by name while taking his turn at tossing the yellowish cubes. He lost more often than he won, but the proceeds he gleaned from his light-fingered work far outpaced the coins he gave up. As the game progressed, Gord worked at fumbling with coins so as to slip many of the growing number of these into his pocket, away from the gaze of those being fleeced out of their wealth. The disappearance of the more valuable coinage was becoming apparent, and one of the stable boys started to ask a question about this. When a shriek came from the common room, everyone from the kitchen rushed out to see what had happened. Gord joined the throng, but not before he managed to scoop up a good handful of the remaining coins. In the space of those few seconds, an uproar had come over the place. The honorable gentleman from 7 Mile Mill had come staggering down the stairs from the upper floor, gasping and gesturing. As he stepped into the main room, somehow saw a knife handle protruding from his upper back and screamed. Ralph turned a bluish hue and expired, falling face down. A babble of questions arose as Gord took in the scene. He heard the ostler shout for Lady Penora, while the wench who had shepherded Gord into the kitchen called out for her charges to find the lady's servant. Gord got away in the confusion, made the street, and used his best skulking techniques to become an invisible boy. He turned east at the first lane, twisted his trail several times to be sure he wasn't being followed, and as dusk fell, made his way back to the rear of the pawn shop. In a matter of minutes thereafter, Gord, rapid and dirty, was re-entering the headquarters of the Master of Beggars. Gord found Ferg upstairs, already questioning Violet, his face flushed with rage. It seemed that she had discovered the gentleman was no town elder at all, but a thief of no mean rate. Violet had found this out when she searched his purse. How did that come to pass? Well, the man, calling himself Ralph, had led her to dalliance upstairs, but instead of then falling asleep when she feigned slumber, he had slipped soundlessly out of bed, taken her purse, and was just about to do the same with her cheap jewels when Violet sat up and objected. At this, Ralph had drawn his dirk and threatened to carve a second mouth into her throat if she made a noise. Violet had stayed silent after that, but when the thief came over to truss up his victim before escaping, she had done something foolish. Pulled out a knife she had secreted beneath her pillow and plunged the weapon into the thief's shoulder. The little blade was strongly poisoned, and the result was his death seen in front of dozens of witnesses. During the hubbub that ensued, Violet had gotten out a window and escaped, But in her haste she had taken the streets and entered the old town by gate, so her progress could be traced at least that far. Furgo took her loot and ordered her to her quarters until she was sent for. Then Furgo turned to Gord and got out of him what he knew. Gord also had to give up his hard-earned coins, all but a pair of silver nobles that he had hidden where only the most careful search would find them, and no such search was made. End of chapter 4. Hello, chapter. Okay. I read another chapter and then we stop. 3 chapters a day. It seems enough. There is 35 chapters at all, so at one point I have to change something. Maybe I continue to read 2 and 3 chapters, I don't know, maybe always 3 chapters and at the last, I don't really know. I improvise it as we proceed. So, last chapter of today, chapter 5. The next morning was like any other one of the 100 or more Gord had spent in the beggar master's house. It seemed that way at least until Gord began to notice a certain tension written on the face of Furgo, Grasp, Will Weiner, and other masters. None of his fellow students seemed to notice, but Gord was more aware of small signs and body language than the others. He had turned out to be, as Clyde had predicted, the star pupil of the lot, even if Gord himself didn't realize it fully yet. As his feeling of unease grew, Gord wished more and more to have a minute to himself, so he could find Violet's group and see what she knew. The morning training session seemed to drag on interminably, but eventually the time for the noon meal arrived, and he hurried to the cellar to get his food and see his companion of the previous day. Violet wasn't there, however. This wasn't unusual. The groups did not always eat at the same times each day because there wasn't room for all of them at once in the cramped lower chamber. Under the ever-watchful eye of Furgo, Gord could not duck away to look for her, much as he wanted to. He spent his meal time idly, eating while again going over everything that had happened the day before. Then it was time for drill again, and after a seemingly endless afternoon session, Gord found himself the beneficiary of a surprise that he received with mixed emotions. He was feted by several of the masters because of his great progress, and the celebration was one that Gord should have relished. The instructors informed him that he was being moved from apprentice to list master, bypassing journeyman status altogether. This was an unprecedented advancement, but there was no great singing in Gord's heart at the news. He pretended joy and celebrated accordingly, but his mood was really dark and his spirit heavy. Something he sensed was wrong. Dizzy-headed and relying from the wine he had consumed, Gord was shown his new master status room late that night. He fell into a drunken slumber and awoke the next day with a terrible thirst in his mouth and an equally terrible hangover. The news came early that morning. The watch had found the body of the woman who was suspected of the murder of a man in the garden quarter. Whoever the victim was, the officials of the city were in an uproar over it. The newly found victim had been beaten, raped, and then strangled, obviously the work of some of the many muggers who roamed the Thieves' Quarter. The victim was Violet, of course. Gord had figured all along that Theobald would never countenance mistakes such as those she had made. Gord was also sure that the fat son of a bitch had been happy to perform the execution of the errant Violet, that the beggar master had thoroughly enjoyed the whole process. With a heart hard as granite, Gord bent himself to the day's activity. His vow to revenge Violet's degradation was nothing he needed to think about further until the opportunity arose. In the interim, he will simply work harder and get better at each and every skill he was given the chance to gain. There was no outing the next day, as had been scheduled. The word was that training was more necessary than the extra income gained from field operations. It was evident to Gord that this was a lie. After all, what better place to get true training and experience than in the field? Actually, doing was much better than practicing with dummies and the like. No matter how clever the lesson, it was just exercise, not real thievery. Could the master Theobald be afraid that this plot had been jeopardized by the violent killing of that stupid thief? That if feared discovery was certain, or else he would not have killed Violet and left her corpse to be found by the watch. That was a dual-purposed ploy. First, it would take the search for criminals in a different direction, and who actually cared for a murderess was in turn slain. Second, if the thieves thought that some daring beggars had overstepped their bounds, they might view Violet's killing as an apologetic execution intended to pacify the thieves. Accompanied by a temporary cessation of non-guild thievery, this would indicate to them that the beggar master had discovered the offenders and eliminated their leader, and all was once again in proper order. The fallacy in this line of reasoning was obvious to Gord, and he fervently hoped that Theobald would not also see it. The guild would not be concerned overmuch about the killing of a single thief, and the foolhardy one at that. Gord could imagine the leaders of the guild, upon hearing of Violet's demise, spying to themselves, "Does fat Theobald really think we care about that?" They would bide their time, giving the beggar master one last chance to change his ways, but if the beggar thievery did not chase altogether, well. When a week later the beggar master's corpse was once again sent into action, Gord was jubilant. He did his best to steal everything valuable and not so valuable in sight. He brought in a record haul, and for it he was given hearty congratulations by all of the masters of the beggar thieves. They said openly that another trip such as Gord's today will certainly be sufficient to make him a full master, bypassing the interim rank of associate. Gord only smiled inscrutably. He knew what the result of the activities of the corps would bring. The hall was in absolute chaos the next morning. During the night, a notice had been pinned to the front door by an assassin's dagger. It read, "Theobald and all those scabs falsely trained by him and his dogs are recognized and are be given due notice that their lives and property are forfeit to the whim and execution of the Thieves Guild. Beggars seek a new master. All those loyal to Theobald prepare to die. Arentol, Grand Guild Master of Thieves, Grey Oak and its territories." No one thought it a joke. The beggars were immediately placed under a state of siege. It astonished Gord that Theobald managed to hold the loyalty of so many of the members of the Union, and it somewhat mystified him that there were persons around who were obviously something other than beggars. The hall swarmed with men in mail, robed clerics, black-garbed assassins, and even a handful of magic users. The gross master of monstrosities must have thrown wide his coffer lids to pay for the likes of this, Gord mused. It was certain that there were few beggars plying their trade anywhere in the city. He would be willing to wager a small store of hoarded coins that none wore the wooden hand symbol of the Beggars Union around their necks if they did dare to appear. No more cash will flow into Theobald's treasury until this matter was resolved, so the beggar master had better have deep chests of coin for his hired swords and spellcasters. The Lord Mayor and directors of the city were turning a blind eye to the whole thing. After all, it was taking place in Old City's worst area, where the beggars lay between the slum quarter and the thieves' quarter. Besides, who among the directors would object to a war between beggars and thieves? Even the guildmaster of thieves, who was a director of Grey Oak, would favor this conflict. It will weed out the less hardy and the less skillful in the ranks of the guild, as well as get rid of a lot of the miserable beggars. Guild, not guild, sorry for the mistake. Guild. The result will be a bigger share of the spoils of the city for each of the thieves who survived, and a correspondingly larger tithe to the guild from each of them, from the guild. To the guild. Sorry. For once, the guild master of thieves and the guild master of merchants were in total agreement and something. And every honest citizen would only see good in such a struggle. With fewer to beg, fewer to steal, they too could but profit. As Gord considered all this, he began to wonder if the officials of the city wouldn't wait until both sides were deeply enmeshed and then smash them both. For the meantime, there was nothing to do but practice. The masters were in conferences and council meetings most of the time, leaving Gord alone to do as he wished. He took the opportunity to keep honing his skills, for he saw much benefit in the mastery of them. There was certainly a score to settle, but more importantly, a livelihood to be earned. The easy life of thievery Gord had experienced was one that so far surpassed his dreams that no other goal had real significance. The end of this idyllic period came in a fortnight. Beggars not ensconced within the safety of Theobald's walls were begging to disappear, and some had been found dead, murdered in various ways. It was time to strike back, and Gord was to be part of the special force the beggar master was sending forth, to counter what the thieves were doing. The fat lord of the lowly understood that he must somehow settle this matter quickly. A protracted conflict could have only one end. Theobald opened the deepest recesses of his headquarters. There was a hidden sub-basement beneath the place, and from it passages led in all directions. There was egress to the sewers also, which meant that there was a low road to nearly everywhere. Mercenaries and beggars will form teams for the retributive strike. The specially trained forces of the beggar master will disguise themselves as various ordinary citizens. Nearby will be the higher swords. When a thief was spotted, the beggar scouts will finger the victim, and then follow so as to keep track of him or her. At first opportunity, the thief will then be taken hostage or slain. Hostages, Theobald stressed, were most important. Any skilled thief must be captured and brought back to the beggar master's mansion if at all possible. Each scout group consisted of a master and an apprentice. As a list master, Gord was a master nonetheless. He and San, a boy of no more than 10 but nearly as large as Gord, were given the mission of going all the way to the river quarter. The strip, an area running from Dockside to Low Street, was notoriously wide open and rosterous. Rivermen and burghers, riff-raff and ruffians, soldiers and sailors, all congregated there for fun and entertainment. Bawdy houses and taverns abounded. Gambling dens were nearly as common as saloons, and saloons were everywhere. In such surroundings, it was only natural that swindlers, cheats, and thieves would abound. In fact, while the headquarters of the Thieves Guild was in the old city, the group's main base of operations was centered on the strip. Gord and Son will simply be two more boys in the crowd, therefore entertainment or whatever else they could manage. San was one of the few of his fellow beggar thieves whom Gord associated with and liked. The boy was clever and looked upon him as a mentor, especially since Gord had attained the status of list master. "What are we going to do, Gord?" "Easy, son. We just cruise the strip and look for likely prospects. The beggar master wants a stage to trade for his fat hide's safety. Well, line 'em up and the muscle will knock them over." Gord said casually, even though he was filled with terrible tension and excitement. After all, he was small and no match for an experienced thief. What if he somehow bungled the mission? "Swell," Sam said with a grin. "Just show me what to do, and it'll be easy. You are the best, Gord." Now Gord was even more nervous, for he had hoped that his comrade would have some idea of how to actually set up some thug and accomplished thief for capture. Obviously, his rank placed the burden solely upon his small shoulders. Sam was looking at him expectantly. So Gord shrugged and replied, "Right, just watch me, kid, and follow my lead." Getting to their destination had been easy, if somewhat smelly. After passing down through the deep cellar, Gord, San, and 3 mercenaries garbed in plain cloaks went through the sewers for nearly a mile. Their way was illuminated by a lantern that glowed with an oddly bright and steady light, which Gord concluded must have been cleric cast light. The use of flame down here could be dangerous, for sewer gas was explosive as well as poisonous. But they had been told that this section was quite safe, and it did seem relatively news all in all. When they reached the place marked with the symbol meaning good action in the beggar's sign, they clambered up a long ladder of rusty iron after hooding the lantern and leaving it to swing on a lower rung. One of the burly mercenaries had to lift the heavy great bar in the sewers alley drain. Then all 5 emerged. The drain was closed with its grate again, and the 2 boys led the expedition through the dark streets of the Wheat Trade District toward Grand Square. The sword wielders were well to the rear, and it was not obvious that the 2 groups had any connection. Gord and San talked to each other, acted frolicsome, and looked as normally boys out for fun would do. They walked the long way from near Wagalter Gate, the place in the wall of Old City where they entered the Thieves' Quarter, past the Grand Square and Citadel, and through the halls and clerk book rapidly. Their skill at seeming playfulness and dalliance, while they were actually moving quickly toward their destination, would have impressed the Grand Master of Thieves. Pushing, shoving, and laughter led to one chasing the other, and then the roles were reversed. This was easy. Once opposite the entrance to the strip, the pair crossed the processional and were soon deep among the roiling celebrants of the place. The Thieves Guild represented more than robbers, burglars, cut purses, and the ilk. The organization also controlled gambling, prostitution, swindles, extortion, loan sharking, fencing of loot, smuggling, forgery, and counterfeiting, to list the more obvious. Most of these activities were going on here, visibly or invisibly. Against such power, the beggars had few and weak means. Allied with the beggars were the lowly street gangs, quacks, gypsies, tinkers, peddlers, jongleurs, and actors. But none such were in view as the 2 lads strolled westward along the Street of the Lights. There were more than the usual number of ruffians, not the street variety, but out-of-work laborers. Their presence in such large numbers indicated to Gord that they had been paid to roam the area in search of enemies of the Thieves Guild. The dull eyes of these thugs passed over both boys without really seeing them. Although it was not really worth the trouble, Gord actually went out of his way to steal the purse of one of these ruffians. They didn't need a few coins to spend anyway, or they would arouse suspicion when they began a serious search for a target. A crowded gambling house called the Wheel of Gold drew Gord's attention. He and San went in casually, and both moved here and there. As the bouncer began eyeing them, Gord produced 4 bits and tossed the brass coins on a table where wagers were being made on which color hole a rat would appear from. His bet was on white. Nobody else seemed to have any faith in that color, for their bets were stacked in piles of bronze and copper. Even a few silver nobles on the 8 other colors. Some looked worried, but Gord smiled. Sure enough, the trained rodent eventually came through the hole before the white space. They now had 8 brass bits, and Gord took them and left for another game. You are sure lucky, Sam remarked to his companion. Gord was surprised at this. Lucky? You are kidding. White was the color that had to win. Now it was Sam's turn to be surprised. Don't try to tell me you can read rats' minds, Gord. Shit, no, Gord exclaimed. Just use your head, dummy. Every other color had a stack of heavy coin on it, and I got my bits down just before the wheel was spun, so the rat had to come out on white. What? I don't follow you, Sam said, blushed. The game's rigged, of course. Gord explained with the patient voice of a teacher talking to an eager but somewhat slow pupil. "The shells win big, the sucker small, and the rat always comes up on the color the operator selects. There was a big sucker money with all of the shell's coins, so when she scanned the table, the operator went for a big hit, cleaned out the chumps, and we doubled our cash. Why she let us win instead of someone else? 4 brass bits? You must be jesting. Let's find out our target and quit fooling around." As the boys slowly waggered and their coins supplely dwindled, the 3 mercenaries moved into position nearby. Gord inclined his head only slightly, and the trio directed their attention to a table where dicing was bringing shouts and cheers. There were over a dozen players, mostly men. With another nod and a finger signal, Gord pointed to a fellow dressed in dark blue velvet, who seemed more interested in watching than in playing. He had his eye on a drunken riverboat captain, who had been lucky indeed this evening. His purse bulged with winnings. The fellow had a pair of sailors with him, but these two were nearly as drunk as their captain, and both had some measure of good fortune too. Likely prospects indeed. Gordon's son wandered over to the dicing table and began carefully looking for the associate of the thief in blue, while pretending to be interested in the play and occasionally wagering. When the 4 others in the thieving group were located, Gord passed the new information to his cohorts in the same manner as he had conveyed the earlier intelligence. The stage was set. The riverman wasn't stupid, even if he was well in his cups. When his luck had turned and the heap of coins before him had been reduced to half its former size, he decided to leave. After tipping the operator of the game, the proprietor of the house, and the serving girl who kept his jack filled with ale, all in lavish manner, the captain departed with his 2 crewmen in tow. All seemed less tipsy than they had while playing, but they were certainly inebriated and less alert than they should have been. 4 of the thieves had left several minutes ahead of the rivermen and taken up casual positions across the street from the Wheel of Gold. The 3 mercenaries had strolled out the door shortly thereafter and taken up an inconspicuous position a short distance down the street. Not far behind them were Gord and Son, who came out the door and leaned against the outer wall of the Wheel of Gold, pretending to be occupied with counting their meager holdings while Gord actually kept a close eye on the proceedings. I don't know if it is pronounced San or Sain. Well, anyway. When the sailors excited the gambling house, they were promptly followed by the head thief in blue, not trying very hard to hide his presence any longer. Gord had an excellent vantage point, much nearer to the rivermen than the 4 thieves or his and Son's 3 cohorts. He noticed one of the sailors nudge his captain and cast his eyes briefly back over his shoulder, and the riverman responded with a small wink as he turned and headed across the street toward a narrow passage between two buildings. "Let's stop down this way for a minute, mates," the captain said, loud enough for all around to hear. "I needs to let out some of that ale I've been putting in." He and his guards continued into the dark corridor, undoubtedly reading themselves to surprise whoever might follow them in. The fellow in blue continued to walk slowly after them, then paused against the wall just outside the passageway while the sailors moved on. The 4 thieves across the street, meanwhile, had disappeared inside the building adjoining the dark passage. A quick glance down the street told Gord that the mercenaries were likewise nowhere to be seen at the moment, but he trusted that they were on the job. Counting slowly to himself, Gord estimated the time it would take the quarter of thieves to get through the building and out into the other end of the passage. His estimate was good, for at about the time he thought the 4 would be ready, the blue-garbed thief came to life. He drew a short sword from under his cape and entered the narrow space between buildings, going into defensive crouch as he did so. The sound of steel on steel rang out. The rivermen probably carried long dirks, thought Gord, and even in their drunken state might be able to hold off a single swordsman. Then suddenly there were cries of pain and surprise. The four thieves had struck from behind, and the sailors were in serious trouble. Unless one was aware of what was happening and listening carefully, none of the combat sounds would have meant anything, for the shouts, laughter, shrieks, and music of the adjacent establishment combined with the noises of passersby to make a confused din. All was quiet in the dark passage for a minute, and then more cries and combat noise came from the corridor. The beggars' mercenaries were giving the thieves a goodly dose of their own medicine. It was time for the boys to move in. Gord looked at his son, motioned for him to come on and run for the place. Gord wasn't particularly surprised to see that the knife he had taken from concealment and now held ready was duplicated by one that son held. The boy had produced a wicked-looking stiletto. In fact, even longer than Gord's weapon. Both were flushed with excitement, eager to join in the action. They approached the entrance to the passageway, one on either side, just as a wounded thief came limping out, trying to get away. He ignored the boys for a second, seeing only curious urchins rather than dangerous foes. Just in time he saw Son's blade darting forward. The man fended off the attack with an easy motion of his own weapon, a dagger as long and nearly as thick as his sword, and in so doing, knocked Sen to the ground. As the thief turned and crouched to stab Sen, Gord's blow to the left side of his neck took him by complete surprise. The knife bit deep, and the man spun trying to nail his new attacker, but it was too late. A heartbeat later, he fell forward, dead. The boys quickly dragged the body back into the darkness of the passageway, where some conflict still raged. Wisely, the two opted to strip the dead thief rather than attempt to mix it up in the confused melee near the middle of the passage. Gord took the thief's dagger and the ring from his finger. San searched for purse and pocket contents. Thereafter both crouched near the corpse, waiting to see what would transpire. The commotion ended with the thud of a body falling heavily onto the stones of the gangway. "Theobald!" A voice hissed, the recognition signal. The mercenaries had indeed done their jobs well. "Gord and Son here," Gord replied. "The one seeking escape is dead." "Good works, lads," the whispered reply came. Let's take our prize and get the Let's take our prize and get the hell out of here. There'll be a devil of an uproar hereabouts soon. The beggar boys joined the three mercenaries, who were breathing hard but otherwise unscathed, and helped them finish looting the bodies. All of the others were dead. Rivermen, thieves, the lot. Save the man in velvet. Somehow the fighters had managed to pummel him senseless without slaying him. Although he was wounded and bleeding. It took a few moments for them to finish, their stripping and rearranging when they were done. The lads exited the passageway, followed shortly thereafter by four men. One appeared to be a drunken soldier of some sort, and the others were waterfolk, helping their passed-out captain back to his ship, somewhere on the docks. End of chapter 5. And for today is all. We continue Friday evening at, I don't know the hour, at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, I don't really know. But Friday evening we continue our reading. So for today is all. Have a nice evening, have a nice dinner, have a nice everything. We'll see again Friday. Bye.